All right, time now 8:35. So earlier in the week, we saw a former commander-in-chief get arrested. And while Donald Trump is the first former president to ever be arrested, he isn't the only president to have trouble with the law. Our Jimmy Alexander has the story of the only president who's been taken to jail while he was serving in office, and it is an interesting one, to say the very least.
Had to be embarrassing. You know, when you think of presidents have had legal issues, two that come to mind is President Nixon and Watergate, and President Clinton with, well, you know. But neither were arrested, but the one who was, while in office, got locked up for doing a crime that's still a problem in Washington, D.C. President Bush got arrested before he was president, and President Trump got arrested after he was president. But there was one president who was serving in office, and he got locked up.
Ulysses S. Grant was arrested for driving his horse-drawn carriage too fast.
Well, right here is where it happened. At the intersection of 13th Street and M Street Northwest is where President Grant got arrested. So, Rebecca, take us back to 1872 and President Grant and having to be locked up, cuffed and stuffed, and sent to the clink. What happened?
So, President Grant loved horses. Of course, he was an excellent rider. You can imagine having been general of the U.S. Army in the Civil War. And, you know, horse racing was a very popular pastime here in Washington. So, there's a policeman, William West, and he's actually been called to this corner of 13th and M Street, not too far from Thomas Circle. And sure enough, who should come speeding down one day but the president himself. Now, Officer West, he's going to play this pretty cool, issue a warning, sort of remind Grant that just the other day a lady had been run down. And Grant's going to be very thoughtful and say, of course, absolutely, yes, sir. I promise I'll watch my speed. And then the next day, who should come speeding down 13th Street again but the president with his horse-drawn carriage and 6 of his buddies. They were actually coming from a racetrack in Brightwood.
Ulysses, what's wrong with you?
Grant was an excellent horseman. His favorite horse was Cincinnatus, which he had ridden throughout the Civil War. If you've ever been to the U.S. Capitol building, there's that beautiful Grant Memorial, and he's on his horse Cincinnatus there. If you visit the National Museum of American History, they actually have one of Grant's carriages. Whether it's the one he was driving on the day of his arrest is unclear to me.
Now, tell us about this officer who has a great story himself.
Yes, so William Henry West had been born enslaved. He had served in the Civil War in a colored regiment, so he was a veteran of the Civil War, had helped to fight for emancipation in this country. He'd only recently joined the police force, 1871. So imagine you've only been on the job about a year. Now you got to decide whether or not to arrest a president you've already issued a warning to. So I have to imagine that put him in a tight spot.
Tell us President Grant's reaction to being arrested.
Grant accepts the punishment, and West, the second time, when this is the second time he's come through, West gives him the hard truth that he's going to have to take him in. That is how West recalled it.
How embarrassing. There you are, the president, and you're being locked up for speeding. Did the president have to pay a fine?
There was a pretty serious process. He had to give up $20, basically a bond. In today's money, it'd be close to $500.
Whoa.
So not a small amount of money. Grant actually would defend West. He said that he was simply doing his duty as an officer. And I think the fact that West was a veteran of the war, had served with such honor and bravery, that was something Grant really respected. And he respected the letter of the law. And he knew if he had done the crime, he had to pay at least the $20, if not do the time.
I mean, can you imagine what was going through that officer's head the second time that he sees the President of the United States racing down the road, M Street, right? M and 13th, right?
Exactly.
Racing down and saying, this son of a gun, I told him yesterday. I told him yesterday.
And that's what he said to him. Now, the interesting thing about Officer West, African-American from Prince George's County, was enslaved. And today, in 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant and Appomattox, pretty much ending the Civil War. 7 years later, this man who had been enslaved was arresting the most powerful man in the world, or I should say in the United States, and the man that when Officer West served in the Civil War, he was the big boss, the general.
Sure.
So that showed that he did follow the letter of the law, and President Grant said, you know what, he's doing the right thing.
You know what? He abided by one very important lesson that I think we all need to remember.
Yeah.
Nobody is above the law.
No, and it's the old term, you mess around, you find out.
You mess around, you play around, you will find out. All right, Jimmy Alexander live in the studio. Happy Easter to you, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. Brittany Ward standing by there in the Weather Center with the beautiful Easter Sunday forecast. Hey, Britt.
Good morning, guys. You know, Jimmy, I really hope he put that on his resume. Hey, I arrested the president because he broke the law.
One last thing I have to tell you. He did, before he died, wrote an article for the Washington newspaper, The Star, because he wanted that story to get out there and be remembered.
Really?
Yes.
Right, we're going to have to talk about that. But anyway, guys, for you guys heading out this morning, have the jacket on hand. It is a very chilly start to our Easter.